Welcome to The Light Within, a podcast for anyone seeking to rewrite their life, live in their light, and align with their soul's highest purpose. I'm Leslie Draffin. Join me as we explore spirituality, sexuality, wellness, and the magical world around us. Hello, beautiful beings. Thank you so much for joining me for the very first episode of The Light Within. I am so excited to be here with you and to be on this journey together. So first things first, I want to tell you a little bit about who I am and my spiritual journey. And then in this first episode, I want to talk a little bit about what my vision is for this podcast and my goals going forward. So my name is Leslie Draffin. I'm a journalist. I've been in the news business for 13 years now, and I have seen some shit. I started in 2008, right when the bubble burst, and I was fortunate enough to get a job before a lot of the hiring freezes started. My first gig was in West Virginia in this tiny town, and I made $15,500 a year. So I was broke, super broke, but I learned so much from being in that market. And eventually I moved on to the Charlotte area and then to Shreveport, to Oklahoma, and now to Texas, where I have lived for the last 4 years. And now I'm an evening news anchor. I have done morning news. I have done reporting. I've done what's called MMJing, which is multimedia journalist, which basically means you shoot, you write, you edit, you do all the things yourself. But now I am in the anchor chair at night, and I'm also the managing editor. So I've really grown over the last 13 years into a position more laid back in some ways, and where I'm able to really just focus on what I love. And another thing that I've been able to focus on here at my current station is a weekly segment called Your Best Life, where I interview people about ways they live their best life. And it started as me doing things like Whole30, talking to people who'd lost a bunch of weight. And now it has progressed into a much more spiritual, deeper conversation type of story every single week, where I've done something on crystal healing, meditation, sound baths, breath work. I talked about periods and menstruation and menopause. And because of all those stories, I really started feeling my light up. And I felt like, okay, this is what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm supposed to be talking to people, digging deeper, and speaking more on spirituality and sexuality and wellness. Then earlier this year, I read Discover Your Dharma by Sahara Rose, and it totally changed my entire perspective. I know I've been doing my Dharma. I've known I wanted to be a journalist since I was, I think, in 5th grade. And now I feel like I just want to be doing more, hence the birth of this podcast. So my plan is to use my 13 years experience of interviewing thousands of people and use that on the podcast to interview people who are in the spirituality realm, the sexuality realm, the wellness realm, mysticism, just a little bit of everything to dig deeper and answer the question of how do you ignite the light within, and how do you find the light within when there is so much darkness? Because a lot of this does come from some of the very dark places I have been. Just recently, within the last couple of years, I went through a terrible divorce. I've battled an eating disorder for 15 years of my life, although thankfully I am now what I would call in remission. But some of those feelings do still come up. I do still have body image issues occasionally, self-confidence issues. I've also gone through anxiety my entire life and a little bit of depression as well. And so I've been able to find some tools that I call my spiritual toolbox to help me through some of those struggles. But I've had therapy, several therapists over the course of my years. And now I'm fortunate enough to be in an amazing relationship. I got married last year in the midst of coronavirus, and he's amazing. So I'm in one of the best places, if not the best place of my entire life right now. And so I wanted to share some of the tools I have learned and talk to some folks who've been through problems like I've been through to find out what helped them make it onto the other side. So my spiritual journey started 2 years ago, January 2019, on the full wolf moon. I remember being in Austin, Texas, looking at the moon and going to a crystal shop and getting some crystals because I'd read a book by Ruby Warrington, and it kind of just dabbled in a little bit of all the spiritual realms. And I really was interested in crystals and finding out about astrology. So I'd gone to a crystal shop and picked up some crystals, seen this beautiful full moon, and felt something within me move. Like I was pulled to it, like I was drawn to it. So I set up a meditation space in my house, bought some plants, the bane of my husband's existence. Seriously, I have so many plants, and started meditating. I also started listening to podcasts by folks like Gala Darling, Sahara Rose, anything that I could find Alexandra Roxo on. I was listening to that as well. So those were kind of some of my early spiritual teachers via podcasts, and journaling as well. But what happened in 2019 is I started to dabble in just about everything. I wanted to figure out any and everything that might be able to help me out of the funk I'd been in. So I looked into astrology. I looked into tarot cards. I was reading about witchcraft. I was reading about how to connect with my feminine body, because forever I had just shut myself off. After my divorce, I'd made some choices that were not the smartest, and I felt like I shamed myself, which meant that I then kind of turned off my sexuality. And so in 2019, I was trying to figure out everything. And what happened was I got overwhelmed. And so that spiritual practice, that morning ritual of meditation and journaling fell by the wayside for months. Then 2020 hit and all hell broke loose. And I think all of us felt like we needed to find a way to dig deep within ourselves to try to battle some of that loneliness, battle that fear. And boy, my anxiety came spilling through the roof. In March and April, I was drinking so heavily and I was so anxious. I could not sleep through the night. And lo and behold, another book by Ruby Warrington kind of jolted me back awake, sober curious. So I stopped drinking, and I was sober for 60 or 70 days, and then went on a vacation and had a couple of glasses of wine. And then I was sober for most of the summer. And still, I wasn't really doing my morning practices. I wasn't meditating. I wasn't really doing much journaling. I was doing breath work here and there, and I was syncing up with the moon a lot because that was something that I still felt very, very, very close to. Then I moved into a new house. We bought a house, actually. So, hello anxiety, because now I have a house I have to pay for. And the drinking just escalated. So I'd gone from not really drinking for 4 to 5 months to drinking wine every single night after I got off work to kind of combat the anxiety. And then in December, when I read Sahara's book, I also was at a point where I was feeling, you got to get your shit together. You got to stop drinking so much. You know, if it makes you feel terrible, you can't sleep, your anxiety is through the roof, so stop. And then another book by Ruby Warrington came out, her workbook through Sober Curious. And so on December 21st, I decided, okay, you're going to stop drinking now. And it was a little earlier than I had planned because I'd planned to do 100 days starting January 1st. But I thought, you know what? You got to do it now. Screw drinking on Christmas, screw drinking on New Year's Eve. Just stop drinking. And over the last 7 weeks, because it's been about 7 weeks now that I'm recording this intro podcast, I haven't drank. I've spent so much of the time that I would be drinking, reading, meditating, journaling, getting back into my morning rituals, my practices with my moon syncing. And I've also started reading tarot cards again, which I feel like are such a good way to get back into my intuition. And I found a therapist, y'all. I found another therapist, and she's amazing. So with all that extra energy, I birthed the podcast, and here we are. So my goal for the podcast is to find folks who are in the spiritual, sexual wellness realm and talk to them about what lights them up, their spiritual paths, anything and everything that makes them feel alive, so that hopefully their journeys can give you a little inspiration, because it was podcasts that really started my spiritual journey. And it's what I continually go back to when I feel a little blah. I find someone I know is inspiring and I listen to their story on a podcast, maybe while I'm working out, while I'm driving to work, when I have a little downtime at my house. And it has been one of the things that lights me up. But really what's lighting me up right now, besides working on this podcast for all of you, is my morning rituals. And we're going to get into that maybe in another podcast where I talk about the things I do in the morning. But just so you know, really quickly, right now my morning practice is meditation, journaling, and pulling tarot cards. I'll also use some sacred smoke to kind of cleanse myself and get me focused. But I spend 30 to 45 minutes to an hour by myself each morning to refocus, to realign, and to connect with my body and my soul. And I've never felt better. So thank you so much for joining me for the very first episode of The Light Within. Please reach out to me on Instagram at thelightwithinpodcast, or you could also email me at thelightwithinpodcast@gmail.com. We're on Facebook as well, and you can find me personally on Instagram at Leslie Draffin. I will have all of those little links in the show notes below. Thank you again so much for joining me. And remember, there is no light without darkness, but there's no darkness without light. I'll see you next time.